Coming up on Chasing the Natty, we're set to turn the page from CFF 2022 to CFF 2023. However, it's always good to reflect on this past season and see what lessons we can learn. We'll be talking biggest surprises, biggest lessons overall that we have learned, as well as comparing preseason ADP and postseason finishes among players. Of course, we'll also be looking to catch you up on some of the bigger coaching changes and transfer portal news. All this and more coming right after this.
Zappy looking to Jared Stearns, who makes the catch and scores.
What a burst! Trey Von Henderson, as advertised, touchdown Buckeyes!
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. All right, welcome in, everybody. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing the Natty podcast. I hope you guys are having a wonderful ride to your work on this Monday morning after conference championship weekend. It is pretty much the end of the 2022 season. We got bowl games, we got the playoffs and everything, but in terms of us playing CFF, I know a lot of you guys are already DMing us, asking us questions like what's going on for 2023 and everything, and of course, we will have all of that to cover. Plenty of time to get to all of that. But before we got too far into the offseason, I thought it was a good idea for us to all come together and kind of recap this past season. Now, what we're not going to do here, of course, is I'm not going to read you off the top 10 players at every position. We're not going to do all of that. We're not going to say who got most most fantasy points per games and everything, because you guys can go look that up yourself. I figured it would be great to get three of us experts on here to really kind of dive into like what we learned, what we think we can apply to next year, because that's the stuff that you guys are going to know about. Again, your mind's already on next year, but in order to do better next year, you got to think about what you're going to do better. And so with me, I have the two wonderful co-hosts I've had all season long with me, and that is Mr. Nate Marquise and Chris Moxley. Nate, you go first. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm great. I'm excited to be on with both of you. I get to see your face all the time, but this is nice to see Mox on here as well. So the three of us chopping it up. We don't get to do it too much, but seems like we do it more once the season is actually not happening than when it actually is. So this will be a lot of fun.
You guys are basically going to get a insight into what the Slack channel for CFF on Campus of Canton looks like throughout the entire season. Mox, what was that?
So that's scary. We discuss a lot of things, so I hope we don't go too deep here.
Absolutely. Mox, how you doing today, sir?
No, I'm doing good. Same thing with Nate. I never get to see Nate. We never chat during the season, right? We're on like two different shows, two different times, 2 different days. But it's good. I'm excited to kind of talk about what the hell happened after we had, a couple episodes over the offseason doing our predictions, talking about what we expect for the season. But now we can actually see how wrong we were for the most part.
Look, doing some reflection.
It's pretty easy to be wrong in college football. So,
but it is great when you are right.
That is true.
So, again, we got a lot to get to today. I think looking at the show sheet, we got 5 different segments we got to cover here today, y'all. So we're going to get pretty much right into it. But before we get too far, got to go ahead and throw in the spiel here real quick. Again, Nate and Mox and myself are all part of the awesome CFF team over at Campus of Canton. It is all 3 of us, including Brandon Sanders as well, and our DFS crew, and Ethan Sowers and Chris K. They all do a fantastic job, especially on the betting side of things. Go check out the Bet on C2C podcast for all of that. We got podcasts, we got articles, including Nate and Mox. They do awesome articles throughout the season and the off season. And we got rankings. We'll have CFF rankings for 2023 before you know it. Pretty much going to wait until, I would say, we're probably going to wait until after the NFL draft deadline so that we know who's coming back and who isn't. But I would not expect you to be waiting much longer after that. We got CFF ADP. All of that will be coming back this offseason. We'll have mock drafts pretty much, like I said, as soon as we know who is coming back, and we'll get started with all of that. go check out the rest of campus.canton.com. Everything you need for your C2C, CFF, Devy leagues, all of it right over there. So, gentlemen, first thing we're going to do here, again, I talked about how much recapping we will be doing, but what a lot of people want to hear about, especially since they haven't heard from us in 2 weeks, is they want to know what's going on with all these coaching changes and transfer portal news. So you got guys already entering the portal, even though I don't believe technically it opens up until next Monday. Next Monday is kind of when we expect it to really start to kick off. Now the conference championships are over, bowl games are getting set up here. So first, we're going to go and look at some of these coaching changes. We're not going to cover every single one. Again, a lot of them have been made. Lots of great hires, some not so great, looking at you, Coastal Carolina, and Tim Beck. But we decided that each of us were going to bring to the table one coaching hire that we believe is going to be impactful for CFF 2023. And I guess we'll go ahead and start here with mine. I'm going to bring up Mr. Deion Sanders, head coach of Jackson State, primetime himself, going over to Colorado. When they first floated this idea that Deion Sanders was going to Colorado, I thought this was Sanders looking to use Colorado as some leverage. I was thinking that he was kind of proving to people that, like, hey, look, other Power 5 jobs are offering it to me. Other schools shouldn't be afraid to offer. But then, all of a sudden, here we are. I believe it was down between this and South Florida, if I remember correctly off the top of my head. And he's here already. We are seeing this impact of this hire. Jimmy Horn, the wide receiver out of USF, a hot name in the portal already, has already named Colorado as one of his finalists. We fully expect Deion Sanders' son, who has been quarterbacking over at Jackson State, to transfer and probably follow his father over here to Colorado State. It has been a very good offensive system there with Sanders. And what do you boys think? Do we think that the offensive system that we've seen Sanders put up at Jackson State can translate to the Pac-12? Seems like a pretty big jump, and we've seen, again, reflecting on this past year, systems like Washington State with Eric Morris and everything kind of falter a little bit, at least get a while to get going when they make that jump from FCS to Power 5. What do you guys think of this hire, and what are you looking forward to?
I'll be honest. I don't know a whole lot about his offense at Jackson State. Have you followed much of what they're doing? I mean, I know his son put up some really big numbers as the quarterback there, but I don't really pay attention to FCS until they officially make the jump, and I haven't looked too deep into his offense.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up the stats as we speak right now. Sanders threw for 3,383 yards. He also rushed for about 174 yards, got 5 touchdowns on the ground as well. Again, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm not totally turned off by the idea of a guy making the jump from FCS to FBS, just because maybe Washington State didn't produce at the level that the three of us had maybe projected. I know Tulane's offensive coordinator came from FCS, and they did very well this year in his first year as OC. So, and then we've seen some others in the past, but I think this is a really fun hire, man. I think Colorado's going to look way different over the next 12 months than they do right now, and I think this is going to be a move similar to when Lincoln Riley took over at USC, where I think he's going to totally gut the roster, and we could see upwards of 20-ish to 25 players join him from the portal. I think that's a legit possibility, and obviously he's got a lot of cachet with his name. We're seeing that already with some portal guys. There's rumors that Brandon Innes, one of the elite wide receivers in the recruiting class, is now considering Colorado. So, yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see a ton of change happen with Colorado. How much that's going to affect fantasy for next year is going to be really interesting to see. I'll have to take a deeper dive into what their offense really looked like this year.
Mox, what are your thoughts on this?
It can only be up for Colorado.
True.
Yeah. And how much worse you can actually be. I don't really know what to think of the offense, mostly because we haven't seen Shadur Sanders, the quarterback, Deion's son, play like high quality competition. They dominated the SWAC, but I mean, I don't know necessarily what to think about that. Like, they played really well against Southern, and Southern is one of the SWAC's better defenses. So like I had a chance to watch that game, but I just have no idea if it's going to translate. But I can tell you that it will be the best Colorado offense in quite some time, regardless.
True.
And they will have the players there to execute.
Do
Whether
we think
or not they can execute is a different question. But I do think there's a lot of optimism to be had.
Not that there's a lot of offensive pieces already at Colorado, but if anybody is a fan of any Buffs players for some reason there, like Alex Fontenot, the running back there, do we expect them to have a role in this offense next year, or do you think this is going to be one of those things like USC where everybody's getting replaced?
Yeah, I like Jordan Tyson.
Yeah, I mean, the wide receiver room actually isn't bad at Colorado. They just haven't had a quarterback that's able to get them the ball very consistently. And I don't know if Deion Sun is the one. Does anybody know how much? Is he a first year or second year quarterback this year, Deion Sun? Second year?
I believe he's the second year.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I think this is a situation where if you're holding any Colorado assets right now, outside of maybe Tyson, I mean, I don't know that they're worth anything. I think he's bringing in everybody. I think every position is going to look totally different, Fontenot included.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised. I was just kind of throwing that fun idea out there in case there's anybody that we might have been missing.
Yeah.
But turns out it's going to be a full overhaul. Next up here, we're going to talk about Mr. Kenny Dillingham going from Oregon to Arizona State. Our prophet down there, Mr. Nate Marquise, called this a couple weeks ago when we were floating around different names of where people could go for different coaching staffs, and Nate absolutely nailed this one. But Chris, you were the one who brought this up as a potential shift in the CFF landscape. So, Moxley, why don't you explain what you like so much about this hire for Arizona State?
He's kind of the opposite of what we've had there in the last couple of years with Herm Edwards, who is like incredibly conservative defense. I want to win the game the right way. I want to win it 17-13. That's kind of his style. Dillingham, I think, will do the opposite of that. So I think you have a lot higher ceiling in a division and, well, really the conference that doesn't really have a lot of competition defensively. And so I think whoever joins Dillingham there, and I think they'll probably bring in a quarterback, probably bring a couple other transfers. They also have Elijah Badger already there. Daniel Nada entered the portal, so they'll probably bring in a running back as well. I just think that offense has a substantially higher ceiling than it had under Herm. So I really like this hire. I think it's one of the better ones in the cycle.
Nate, you wrote that awesome article for CFF quarterbacks transferring a couple weeks ago. Were there any names on that article that struck you as potential fits for Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State?
Yeah, I mean, he's now got a reputation because of what he did with Bo Nix as a QB whisperer of sorts. He totally resurrected his career. So I think DJU is a possibility here. I think that Jacoby Criswell is a possibility, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But Criswell was recruited really hard by Auburn back when Kenny Dillingham was the offensive coordinator there. So there's ties. Clearly, Dillingham likes what he saw out of Criswell earlier. So yeah, I mean, there's a handful of others. Who knows what direction? I think we can say with confidence that he's going to add a quarterback or two out of the portal. What I think is interesting is, I mean, obviously Dillingham had a really nice season as play caller for Oregon, but he's already hired Bo Baldwin as his offensive coordinator, and Bo Baldwin's out of Cal Poly, another example of we're looking at a lower level guy coming back up. But Baldwin was I believe, if the name is correct here, he was the offensive coordinator for Cal a few years back. And this was back when, right after Dykes had left. Anyways, he's more of an air raid type, which is kind of interesting. And it just never meshed with Cal, and he ended up getting let go a couple of years ago. But I'm curious to see what quarterback they think is a fit for his system there, if he indeed is going to be the one calling plays and not Dillingham.
I think it'd be the biggest twist ever if he just kept it with Emory Jones.
Oh God, that's not happening. I think there's zero chance that happens.
I feel like
I don't even know that Emory Jones even has a job anymore, right?
Yeah, you're right. I'm like Chris K over here right now. I'm just causing problems on purpose. All right, Nate. You have your coaching hire that you wanted to bring up here, and that is Hugh Freeze going from Liberty to Auburn. Auburn couldn't get one Ole Miss head coach, so they just went and got the old one. Nate, what do you like about this hire, and what do you expect out of this for CFF?
Yeah, I kind of went with the chalk here, with Hugh Freeze taking the big job so far that's been open, which is Auburn. It's just a situation where, for CFF purposes, Hugh Freeze has been a pretty consistent, especially at the quarterback position, producer of some nice fantasy producers. I mean, obviously he had Malik Willis a couple of years ago, one of the best in the country, and what he did with Chad Kelly during his time at Ole Miss was really impressive. I think that we probably see a transfer go there, but although I do think Robbie Ashford has potential. So yeah, I just think Auburn's defense has got a ways to go. There's a lot of shootout potential here. So I think whoever ends up being the quarterback, and even some opportunity for the running back, whether that's Hunter or whoever it is, maybe they add through the portal. I think we've got a lot of fantasy relevance that we could be looking at with this roster.
Yeah, especially with what he's done with some dual threat quarterbacks over the last couple of years. We saw that with Malik Willis, and we almost saw it with Kaidon Salter this year. If Salter could have stayed healthy, he was really on a roll there for a couple of weeks. So I like the call on Ashford. I think. Oops, excuse me. I forgot to turn off notifications. That's my bad, y'all. Moxley, what do you think about this hire?
It's fine. I'm really curious to see who the quarterback is as well. And I think there's a good shot that it might for Ashford is at least going to be able to compete for the job. I think he's just what Hugh Freeze likes in a quarterback. Yeah. I mean, we were just talking about this. Like, this is a type of dude that I think you would rather have than like a TJ Finley who's on the staff, right? Mm-hmm. I think Ashford fits that mold a lot better. But it really depends who the quarterback is, because that's going to change the entirety of the offense. Because I mean, Malik Willis was good, but how many wide receivers was he supporting for fantasy relevance?
True, not many.
None, really. Like, not confidently at least. So it really depends what Freeze wants to do on offense, because it could be a black hole offense. I mean, outside the quarterback.
It could also be like with the wide receivers and everything. I mean, when Willis was there, I don't know. I mean, obviously his passing numbers weren't fantastic, but at the same time, they spread it around a ton while he was there. Versus like this past year, we saw Demario Douglas. They started funneling it to him a whole lot more. So I think that's just part of it.
A couple guys though to the draft, or like eligibility wise. I don't remember, but I don't want to get to like the weeds of it. But yeah, like I just wonder if they didn't have the talent.
Yeah, and also guys, but like
Auburn will.
Like Yarbo went down as well during the year, if I remember correctly, as well. So there was just less bodies for them to depend on. But
so a couple things kind of hit me with this. One, who's to say maybe Demario Douglas doesn't come with him? So maybe
probably be the best receiver that Auburn would have then.
But two, what you brought up with Robbie Ashford and him being a fit for Hugh Freeze, I totally agree. Robbie Ashford was somebody whenever he got to Oregon, I thought he was a perfect fit for Joe Moorhead's system there in Oregon. I mean, he is a true dual threat. He is very athletic. This will be really interesting to see if Freeze wants to handpick his own guy, or if he gets there and watches a little bit of tape of Robbie Ashford and is like, no, I can definitely make this work, because I do think it's a really, really intriguing fit. Yeah, none of those other quarterbacks on campus there are not a fit.
Are you not ready for the resurgence of TJ Finley?
Oh God, no. TJ Finley needs to go to Jackson State or something.
Yeah, just go have fun your last year. Alrighty. So those are a couple of the coaching hires that we like. Again, there's other big ones out there. Again, just from a pure football perspective, Matt Rule at Nebraska, obviously a very big one. Luke Fickell going to Wisconsin. I didn't even know Luke Fickell was really on the market this time around, and Wisconsin lands him out of nowhere. That's a really big hire for them. South Florida just hired Golish, the offensive coordinator from Tennessee. That should be a pretty fun system moving forward for CFF. Also, if Taven Jackson might want to follow him down there, that'd be kind of interesting, I would think. But even still, these are the three that we thought were the biggest news and the best ones to talk about for CFF. Let's go talk about the transfer portal. Again, tons of names we could be talking about here, but we're going to kind of focus on 3 names that we're really going to focus on as potential CFF landscape changers for next year. I've got a quarterback. Nate has brought a running back to the table, and Chris Moxley, of course, brings a tight end to the table, which I love. We're going to look at here first. I'll bring up my guy. I got to talk about Jacoby Criswell. This is a dude that has now entered the portal for UNC. There's a little bit of talk about maybe Drake May is the one who enters the portal, trying to move up in competition. Criswell moves first. He is the first one in the portal. Pretty good indication that May probably stays at UNC. I would think that Criswell, if he knew that May was leaving, would probably stick around. Could also mean that Criswell is just sick and tired of playing the waiting game for May and just decided to take action to his own hands. This is a dude that I think could start at most Power 5 schools. If everything that we had seen and everything we had heard from spring onward, from the spring game and everything, Criswell looked like the better quarterback than May during the spring game. The entire offseason, we saw that he was a guy that the competition between him and May was apparently neck and neck. This is somebody the staff has talked up massively throughout there. And then we finally saw May play, and May, outside of the last 3 games, really just lit it up the entire year. And so if Criswell truly was close to that, he is going to be somebody that's going to make a lot of schools very, very happy. Somebody's going to nail a great quarterback transfer here. And I think there's a lot of good fits for him. Like Nate said earlier, Arizona State makes a whole lot of sense here. Trying to think off the top of my head. I had another name. Oh, well. Mox, what are your thoughts on this?
I think wherever he goes, he's going to make the offense better. I find it hard to believe that there are multiple better quarterbacks that will enter the portal after him. And I think he's a Power 5 level quarterback. They're at UCLA earlier today. We like projecting any mobile quarterback with a good.
Yeah, I know, right?
Halftime. Mm-hmm. So, but I think Arizona State is interesting as well. Like Nate said, he's just a good player. He really is. I'm really excited to see what he does, because I really do think that if an offense didn't have a good quarterback this year, or was struggling in their passing game for whatever reason, he could seriously elevate whatever team he goes to. So it's definitely worth watching. He's probably the biggest game breaker in the portal as of right now, I would say.
Yeah. I would definitely agree. Nate, what are your thoughts on Criswell?
Yeah, I'm a big Criswell fan. I think he does end up being one of at least the top 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the portal, and that's assuming there's even more to come. I think wherever he goes, he's going to be essentially promised a starting gig. This is a guy that's had to sit behind Sam Howell as well as Drake May. He's a guy that wants to jumpstart his career now. I thought Arkansas would be probably the perfect fit. He's a native there. They recruited him crazy hard, but now KJ Jefferson announced he's returning, so that's kind of off the table. Arizona State potentially, if he wants to go west. Auburn, I think he too would be a great fit for Hugh Freeze. I think Moxley mentioned it with UCLA. A couple ones that I think could be really interesting that are in kind of dire need of a quarterback here. Rumors are Spencer Sanders will not return to Oklahoma State. That could be a fun fit in a Mike Gundy system. Oregon State is a quarterback away from being a really, really good team.
Oh, yeah.
Competing for Pac-12 championships. And then I'll go homer here. What if Dylan Gabriel moves on to, let's say, UCLA or something like that? Oklahoma might be looking for a quarterback to bridge the gap to Jackson Arnold. So I think he could fit in a Jeff Levy system and look really good in Crimson and Cream. That's just me personally, though.
Nah, he can fit in almost any system, right?
That's what I'm saying. That's kind of the thing that's excited about him, is that anybody could use him.
Yeah, we haven't got to see much of him, and it was kind of sad that we didn't even, North Carolina never blew anybody out, so we never really got to see much of him. But from the little bit we have seen and what we know from his recruiting film, his arm is stronger than Drake May's. He's just, we just don't have a whole lot of other information. He's fairly athletic. We just don't know how good of a quarterback he really is, but the tools are there. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Nate, we'll move on to your transfer that you've brought to the table here. You want to talk about Mr. Carson Steele, running back out of Ball State, entering the transfer portal. He was the RB5 on the year. So what are you thinking here, Nate?
Yeah, crazy. This one came out of left field, didn't it? I mean, a top 5 producer. I think a lot of people are going to be fooled by his whiteness, that he's maybe not that skilled of a running back. But
8.
let's not forget the fact that he was second only to Bijan in it was either broken tackles or forced missed tackles. The dude is a legit running back. So I think we could maybe shed that stigma a little bit for him. But and he actually showed that he could catch the ball out of the backfield a little bit this year too, which was a nice surprise. I don't know if you guys have thought of any landing spots. He screams Big Ten to me. I don't know about you guys, but the idea of maybe him taking over for Chase Brown at Illinois.
That was my initial thought.
It's kind of fun. Wisconsin, if Braylon Allen actually were to move on to USC or Michigan, could be fun. He's a native from Indiana. Does Dion make a run at him? We kind of, threw out that rumor in our Slack line. So any of those spots sound like some pretty fun landing spots.
I'm in full agreement with you. I think he probably lands somewhere in the Big Ten. Northwestern might be an interesting one if Evan Hull were to move on. Trying to think who else might make a run at him.
Michigan State's always in the market for a transfer running back, it seems like.
Yeah, and none of their guys really worked out this year. But then again, the entire offense really didn't work out. So really underestimated how much Kenneth Walker carried that offense the year before. Yeah. Mox, what do you think overall about this transfer? What do you think? What are you looking for here?
Wherever he goes, his value is going down. I think it's
I can agree with this.
I think he's moving up in class to a Power 5 conference. 3 schools that didn't actually offer him, but were like in on him: Indiana, which he's from Indiana, Kentucky, and Purdue. All those are pretty interesting. Not really keen on the Indiana one, but I mean, Kentucky or Purdue, there's a lot. Cavassier Smoke is transferring out.
Chris Rodriguez is done.
Yep, going to the draft. Purdue, Devin Mockabee, I was watching him yesterday. Like, he's fine. He's like a small Xander Horvath. They wear the same number. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
I like both those spots, to be honest. I do think he's going to level up, and I think he's good enough to be a quality Power 5 back. I don't know that he's anything special.
What about Louisville?
Nah.
They did just lose a lot, though.
They've lost a lot, but again, you got
really offer him.
But aren't they going to be in the market for a transfer running back? Don't you think?
Yeah, they will. They'll add some money.
Yeah. Sure. I guess. I don't know. That wouldn't again. No real landing spot's going to excite me at this point. This is a guy that should, if the CFF consultant firm was telling him where to go, it would be
never leave the MAC.
Stay at Ball State. But if he were to go to Louisville, I would understand. But I think he's just setting himself up to be overtaken by Ruben Owens by the end of the year. I think they're going to have a hard sell with Ruben Owens coming in for any transfer options this year for Louisville.
What about Nebraska?
Yeah, that one kind of crossed my mind too. I think that could kind of work. I think Matt Rule's going to.
I would say with Matt Rule,
hit some options there. On Ruben Owens, I still am not convinced he ends up in Louisville.
I'm not either. But if he is, it's going to be hard for Louisville to sell a transfer running back to come in, because they all know, especially with the NIL deal that he's rumored to have, they're going to expect him to play early and often. So basically, it's like you're coming in knowing what you're getting.
He's from Texas, right?
He is. Yeah.
Yes.
I wonder. I just wonder if there's not as much incentive for him to not flip. As, kid from California,
I heard
you can get paid high school for your NIL deal.
I heard rumors that Ohio State was going to make a run at him.
Yeah.
So.
I would not be surprised if he flipped it. There's been a lot of smoke to that fire.
Yeah.
If there's any truth to the idea that Cedric Baxter gives Florida State a really strong look and decommits from Texas, then I think Texas jumps in the mix for Ruben Owens.
Oh, 100%. But anyway, back to our transfer guys. Again, Carson Steele, I think we're all in agreement here that, on a football perspective, he deserves to move up. He is a guy that, he's killed it in the MAC. Somebody's going to give him a shot. For CFF, there's no way any of the landing spots he is at gives us top 5 upside like he did this year. So,
yep, totally agree.
Next transfer here, Mox going out of left field. They're shooting from deep, and then they're shooting from outside the stadium. I love it. But you have brought us tight end Kyle Morlock, a tight end out of Shorter University, which I'm pretty sure some people listening to this podcast think that is where you might go to school, Mox. Mox, tell us who this man is and why should we be so excited about him?
Okay, so I had a trouble coming up with somebody that I think was going to make a true impact. And this is a guy who, let me start from the beginning. He is from Blairsville, Georgia, which if you've never heard of Blairsville, no surprise, there's only 700 people that live there.
Yep.
He played high school. He was a 210-pound tight end, real lanky. Nobody was interested in him at the time. Goes to Shorter University, which also is in northern Georgia. Not a lot of people there. Division II. Bulks up. He is now 6'7", 245. When you turn on his tape, this dude should not move like someone who is 6'7", 245. He is a fantastic route runner. He has great hands. He cuts like a guy who's 3 inches, 20 pounds lighter. I mean, he's pretty impressive getting in and out of breaks. And he's a great blocker. And this is Division II, right? So it's hard to see what will translate, but the effort is there. And if they can coach up the technique a little bit, I think they could probably do that at the next level as well. Here's what's really interesting, though. I've said all this stuff about this D2 tight end. Here are a handful of his offers. These aren't all of them. Tennessee, Oklahoma, LSU, Florida State, Missouri, Pittsburgh.
Nobody's missing him now.
Demand. Yeah, he's clearly in demand at some of the highest caliber schools in the country, and some of those that are NIL schools. So I do wonder if his services are in quite the demand based on what we've seen. I was honestly really impressed with what I was able to watch of him. And trust me, there is not that much out there on him. What I have seen, he looks like a guy who can play and contribute in an offense. If you're bringing him in, especially if you're like a NIL school and you're giving him an NIL deal, would not be surprised if he runs as the primary receiving option or is on the field for 80% of tight end snaps for a team, even if some that's blocking. Really, really talented player.
Yeah, he seems like a really, really talented player. And again, I didn't know a lot about him before you put him on the show sheet, so I did a little bit of digging, and I found pictures of him. And Division II football, this man makes everybody who's facing him look like just small humans. He is massive compared to everybody else on the field. Obviously, that might change a little bit, but again, he's still 6'7", 245. This is Darnell Washington size over here for the most part. He is absolutely going to be a weapon that wherever he lands. But where would you say out of those offers, Mox, would you find him the most interesting?
There's so many moving pieces of all of his offers so far. Not Pitt. I don't want him to go to Pittsburgh. I'll tell you that.
They screwed Gavin Bartholomew. I don't want any tight end ever go there again.
Tennessee is pretty interesting because I think they want to use a tight end, but I don't think they have one. Princeton Fan is just not a quality tight end, but they use him. They use him in a couple different ways. He's obviously not Princeton Fan in terms of what he does. I think Florida State might be interesting if Jordan Travis is going to stay. They don't really have they use Johnny Wilson as their big body player, and he is not. He just isn't good. I'll just say it. He just isn't good.
He's just tall.
I think he could take that role. Johnny Wilson has no hands, can't separate very well, but he's tall. Kyle Morlock is actually good, and so I think that'd be a pretty interesting fit. LSU would too. There's a lot of options. I think that when you have a guy that's a mismatch like this, I think you want to feature him. So I mean, I'd be happy with a lot of places where he went.
I think Nate would cry a little bit if he went to LSU because that would basically hurt a lot of the Mason Taylor hype going on over there. Nate, what do you have? You have any thoughts on Morlock?
Not much. I'll be honest with you. 30 minutes ago, I'd never heard of Kyle Morlock. I'd never heard of Shorter University. So, but I did look up some of the offers and just kind of some of his stuff while Mox was talking about him. And two that actually stood out to me were and based off of what he's been offered so far, I'd be surprised if he ended up here. But Oregon State and Purdue were two other offers that he had mentioned.
Love that.
Those are two programs that are likely losing their stud tight ends to the NFL, and have proven that they will use tight ends quite a bit. So I think both those landing spots could be really fun if he ended up there.
Yeah, I like those calls a lot. The only thing I would say is, again, Shorter University down here in the South. Is he willing to make the jump up to the Midwest or out to the West Coast?
Right.
We'll see. But
he clearly has talent. The first thing I look at whenever I go to check out a prospect or a recruit is, okay, what's your offer list look like? It's one thing to have, maybe one or two P5 offers, but when it's pretty lengthy and some pretty big programs with some programs that have proven to scout very well, like he has, that's an impressive offer sheet.
Yeah, and that goes for 3 stars as well. Like when you get down to the weeds on some of the 3-star recruits and everything, look for the ones that, again, while the 2 guys above them might have an offer from NC State and Colorado before Dion gets there, look for the guy who somehow has offers from Georgia, LSU, Ohio State. Like clearly something's flying under the radar there that you want to get involved with.
This is kind of not on the same. It's tangentially related, but I want to bring it up because I think it's actually important. Keep an eye on schools who are the first to offer players too.
Oh yeah,
and like sharp schools.
Yeah.
Boston College is one of them. Boston College routinely offers really, really high-end players who end up never going there. Andrew Paul is a good example. I think they were the first one on Andrew Paul. I believe it's Andrew Paul. Whatever, a 3-star who ended up going to like way out kicking his coverage in terms of where he was. Like Boston College routinely does that. They're a school that I like to see who's offering them first to kind of gauge what I think that impact might be, even if they're a lower end player. And there's a handful of those, and I'm something that I want to look into more this summer, but that's something else. Rome is pretty close to Auburn, right? And he has an offer there. It's pretty close to Knoxville.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised if he stayed in the South.
Yeah,
2 hours, 2.5 hours.
About 2.5 hours, I would say, from Rome, because like Rome is like northwest Georgia, Auburn's like east, like mid Alabama, so not terribly far from each other.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so that catches you guys up on the transfer portal coaching news. Again, obviously so many names we could talk about here, and we'll get to as many of them as we can, especially when they land places that seem CFF relevant. We'll be sure to bring that to your guys' attention, but we got so much to talk about here today. We're just going to keep it to 3 names for today, and now we're going to really dive into some of this recapping of what happened this season. Alrighty. One of the best ways that we could talk about the recapping the season is to talk about what kind of caught us off guard and see if there's any way that we can apply to it moving forward. And I'll go ahead and start off with mine. Once again, each of us are bringing a different item to the table here we cover a pretty good swath of things here. I would say my biggest surprise of the season was Quinshon Judkins just completely taking over Ole Miss this year. We had Zach Evans come in through the transfer portal, and he was being taken as a top 3 round back in CFF drafts this year, and why not? We'd seen what Lane Kiffin could do with running backs like Devin Singletary before we fully expected Ole Miss's offense to once again be clicking this year, and especially with Evans possibly being the best player in that offense. Why not take the shot on him? They also brought in Ulysses Bentley, which a lot of people wanted to get in on the action of because he's a pretty good receiving back. But then there's like a steady drumbeat throughout most of the offseason about Quinshon Judkins coming in. They're very happy with this 3-star running back that they were bringing in. And everybody's like, okay, he's a great guy to pick up. He'll probably be there after Zach Evans leaves, and then he's a year 2 guy. Quinshon Judkins said, I ain't waiting. I'm going to out-touch Zach Evans by about 100 carries this year. Now, Evans has been kind of on and off the field, whether that is because he's saving himself or there are legit medical issues, who knows. Regardless, Quinshon Judkins really looks like what Lane Kiffin had in Devin Singletary back during that time. He was the RB, I believe, RB9 on the year as a true freshman. He just an absolutely incredible season that he has had, and basically rendered both Zach Evans and Ulysses Bentley just completely moot. So I didn't see this one coming. What do you guys think of Quinshon Judkins this year? And is there anything we can learn from this that we might apply to future freshmen that could possibly take over backfields that we didn't see coming?
Go ahead, Mox.
I'm going to read the Can freshman supplemental guide moving forward. That's my takeaway.
I agree.
They, Matt Brennan kind of led the charge. I think Colin was on this as well, but they had him, I think, RB7 and consensus had an RB46. So that's my takeaway. But more realistically, I think that is a legit thing when you go outside of the 24/7 scouting resources. Who is high on these players? Do you trust their evaluation is one thing. Two is just follow the buzz and like be willing to overdraft if you think that the buzz is legit. Like there are certain players we didn't hear anything about. Jaden Knott's a great example as well. Jaden Knott had buzz all throughout camp and played a huge role in the spring game. And there was legit talk that he was going to take over, and he did.
He did.
So I just make sure that you're actually listening. Is the best advice I got for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is another case like you talked about. I mean, the spring game, they're sitting there interviewing the coaches throughout the spring game and in the Grove game or whatever it is they call it. And multiple times, Lane Kiffin and some of the other staff members said, we really, really like Quinshon Judkins. We think he's going to be a big time factor for us this year. I mean, sometimes you got to listen to what the coaches say and believe them. It's hard to kind of weed out what exactly to believe and what not. But in this case, Kiffin was obviously being brutally honest because it did not take long before Judkins took over and at the end of the season, I mean, he was the best running back on that roster.
Yeah, easily. Alrighty, Mox, we'll go on to your surprise that you listed here, and you want to talk about TCU. So, Mox, what about TCU surprised you this year, and what do you think can be applied moving forward for CFF players?
I don't know what can be applied moving forward. Maybe just the idea that identifying situations where teams have quit on their coach, because I think they quit on Gary Patterson last year. I think there were a lot of people who were unhappy with the way that was going, unhappy with the defense, unhappy with the offense, because both units took a huge step forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Sonny Dykes plays a huge role in that, but the talent didn't change. Yeah, you brought in 2 highly regarded freshmen that played small parts, but the talent was there. This team just wasn't clicking. Part of that is Sonny Dykes, don't get me wrong. But part of that is identifying teams where there's an obvious rebound situation. Troy was another example of this as well. Like going from Chip Lindsey to John Sumrall was a massive change for that team. So identifying quit teams is kind of my biggest takeaway there. Just make sure that you base less on last year's results and more looking forward. Who maybe is coming in, and it doesn't even have to be personnel change, because this wasn't even a personnel change situation. Like Washington State, for example, like it just was a team who was actually trying and wanted to compete for their head coach.
Mm-hmm.
So Troy was another example. Who was the other one that I had when I wrote this down? Now I don't remember, but I do think there are a lot of situations like this around the country each year that are just Georgia Southern was one too.
Oh yeah.
Like, yes, it was obviously a different system, but like they had quit pretty much.
So are there any teams this year, Mox, that you can identify towards the end of the season that you think might fit this criteria going into next year?
Georgia Tech was one. They quit on Jeff Collins pretty heavily.
True.
And then Key came in.
Yeah.
Liberty quit down the stretch, but that's a little different.
Auburn
certainly quit. Although when Cadillac Williams came in,
yeah,
they were competing a little harder. But those scenarios are somewhat easier to identify. Like you can see when a team is just not playing up to its talent level, and the coach is on like that. I think West Virginia is going to be this. If they're not already this, they're going to be this next year.
I say they'll be it next year, because they've already said Neil Brown's coming back for another year, and he will be probably the first off. Like if you could put money on first head coach fired during the season next year, I would put a lot of money on Neil Brown.
Yeah. The thing that I found interesting with TCU is how successful they were with one, the backup quarterback that didn't even start week one.
Yep.
And two, how successful they were with getting basically no production from their first round draft pick wide receiver for the first, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks of the season. And then at times throughout the entire second half of the season as he became injured. I mean, they basically got 2 or 3 good performances out of Johnston. So yeah, I mean, it's a case of a coach that has proven to have a really good system for CFF purposes. And surprisingly, he did not take a lot of transfers,
Yeah.
or at least transfers did not play as big of a role as a lot of other first-year coaches. He worked with what he had. He apparently liked what he had, and yeah, like Mock said, they'd kind of given up. At least that offense had on Patterson, and I was surprised they were able to continue to win games throughout the year. But that team's got a lot of they fought hard for him, and they made plays when they needed to. So yeah, I think Arkansas kind of fits a team that seemed to really falter down the stretch and give up. I don't know that they're going to make any coaching changes this offseason, but it would not surprise me if say a Miami makes a run at Kendall Briles.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd heard rumors of Kendall Briles.
Coordinator. Yeah, it would not shock me if Kendall Briles ends up somewhere and there's a little bit of a reset button that happens at Arkansas this offseason, and we see that offense look a little bit different, and maybe that team as well, that program as well, has a little bit more life next year than they had towards the end this year.
Yeah, hopefully. And I think part of Arkansas's problem was KJ Jefferson going down, and there just being a massive drop-off at quarterback there. That offense just did not look right. And Malik Hornsby, very talented quarterback, don't get me wrong, but I think he's going to produce a lot better if he moves down a level or two.
Boise State's another example. When they
Yes.
made that change, made that change of offensive coordinator to Dirk Cutter, they were a totally different team. And they obviously there was no change in personnel because it happened mid-season, but that's a good example of a change can kind of breathe some life into your program.
It coincided with the Talon Green, Bachmeyer to Green situation,
Correct.
But that was 100% coaching change. I totally agree.
Yep.
You brought in a guy who was well respected within the program, who'd been head coach before, well respected in the program. Like, that's perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Changes in the coaching world can be a great thing for your team, but Nate, you wanted to bring up one of your surprises this season, and that was a coaching change that didn't really seem to work out, at least not for this first year. Nate, tell us about Colorado State.
Yeah, so speaking of systems with a coach and a staff that had proven to be very successful for CFF production, that simply did a belly flop on us this year over there at Fort Collins, Colorado. That staff brought a lot of the pieces, Clay Millen and a lot of the wide receivers and all that over from Nevada, that it looked like it was going to be a fairly seamless transition. It's the same conference. It's not like a step up in competition. And man, did they lay an egg this year. And really, I guess what we could say there's one fantasy relevant player on that entire roster for all of 2022.
Torrey Horton.
Yeah,
Torrey Horton was wide receiver 10.
Yeah. So in my opinion, I'm probably maybe I'll get burned by this, but I'm not ready to give up on them. And I think that they're somebody that I would reinvest in next year and hope that there's a little bit of a bounce back, that you could maybe get them for cheaper than what you were getting Clay Millen and some of those other guys. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they look like next year, because this year was a massive disappointment for that Colorado State offense.
So for the CFF Awards article that John Lobb writes every year, he invited me back. So go read that article. A bunch of CFF experts coming together, hand out postseason awards. Really good article. But I wrote about the wide receivers, and I talked about how one of my early picks for wide receiver 1 next year is potentially Torrey Horton at Colorado State. Because I kind of agree with you, Nate, that year 2 installing this system for Jay Norvell, I hope, is a much better deal. But even if it doesn't get much better, I would think that Torrey Horton would still continue to eat over there. Again, they were offensive this year, not offensive, but offensive this year in what they were able to do. And Torrey Horton still finished as the wide receiver 10, 15.75 fantasy points per game on the season. Which, by the way, I'm looking at this chart of wide receivers. There's a huge drop off from like the top the top 4 or 5 wide receivers, and then down. Not a great year for wide receivers, but even still, like Torrey Horton, I think we should still expect him to do well. I'm hoping that Clay Millen takes a step forward, or they just bring in somebody else and try something new, because they have to do better than what they did this year. Mox, what do you think about Colorado State? You were shaking your head earlier when Nate says that he's not ready to give up on them. You seem like you're ready to give up on them. What do you think?
No, I was shaking positively. I do feel like they're going to be value in next year's
That doesn't
draft
make any sense.
How bad it was. What do you mean?
You don't shake your head positively. You nod positively, but you shake your head.
I know. I was like this. I was nodding a lot.
I saw a shake of the head.
Well, if I gave the wrong impression to those on video, I apologize, because I agree.
Okay. I was a little flabbergasted. I was ready for Mox to come in here and be like, nah, they're going to be crap next year.
No, you have to think about how much that program changed in the offseason. Because it wasn't just like him bringing a handful of guys over. It was him bringing like 10 guys.
True.
Bunch of transfers out. Zero continuity. A lot of these guys that he brought over were not players, like starters for this Nevada team. So it's a whole bunch of guys who had never started, going to a new system, going to a new play. Like, it was just, we should have pumped the brakes on this. Like, hindsight's 2020, but like, we probably should have realized that it probably wasn't all going to come together year one. I do think it could come together year two, though.
Yeah, it was almost to the point of, because that Steve Adazio system is so polar opposite from the air raid, the Mummy air raid. It was almost like they were trying to make this transition from like a triple option offense into an air raid. I mean, it's just like, it's that big of a change they were trying to make. So blocking schemes, everything like that, they're having to reteach everything to these guys.
The only thing that kind of makes me a little good, Mox.
No, just to say, it was crazy how different they are. And the personnel's all different. Like, it's just,
the one thing that makes me a little concerned is the fact that you saw guys like Dante Wright leave, which definitely a lot of people out there thought that he could have a really good year in a true offensive system that wanted to pass the ball. He never even got on the field hardly. He got into the transfer portal very early in the offseason. And then even a guy who came over with Norvell and Melquan Stovall, who a lot of us expected to be that clear number 2 for them this year, he also entered the portal. So you're looking at a couple guys there that like kind of tell me that there's something a little bit more than meets the eye was going on here, if that makes any sense. You guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know. It was a dumpster fire of a season, and when that happens, you tend to see a lot of guys jump ship. So
fair enough.
Yeah,
Norvell brought in his own guys. Period. So I wasn't surprised Dante Wright moved on. Melquan Stovall was never really an impact player in Nevada either. Like, he had some good games, but he wasn't an impact guy. He's like a short downfield. He's not a jump ball specialist. That's probably. But he like relied on that way more. Like, he relied on not separating way more than a guy his size should. So like, I think he had a lot of hype in spring, but I don't know if he was actually that good. He's like a really weird profile. So I just wonder if it's like you just totally erase this year from the record. And that's basically what I'm gonna do.
Yep. They need better QB play.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, Millen has to be better though. That's true.
Or you bring in Brennan Armstrong.
It would definitely. Brennan Armstrong's not going to Colorado State, but it definitely would not. It definitely would not surprise me if they snag a guy out of the portal and say, "Hey, Millen, we brought you over here to be the guy, but that didn't work out very well, so now you got to compete for it." So that wouldn't shock me at all.
Yeah, it wouldn't shock me either.
Come on down.
Hey, there you go.
There you go. All right, so those are our surprises. We can move on to just some overall lessons that we learned. Again, we're trying not to do, we kind of already did before about like what systems surprised us, which ones disappointed us and everything. These next 3 that we're going to talk about are more of overall CFF strategy that we've learned this year, things that we kind of need to adjust, maybe based on things shifting in the CFF landscape, things we tried this year, didn't work out and everything. And I'll go ahead and start with mine here. And one of the bigger changes I would say to the CFF world, at least if you're playing on Fantrax, was the introduction of the backup system for CFF. Again, we all know one of the worst parts about playing in CFF is dealing with the injury reports and people just not playing with no indication whatsoever. Before the backup system and everything, people had plenty of ways to get around this. I personally already had a backup system in a lot of my leagues. I just did it manually. You got guys like Nate and Chris below me who just prefer best ball all around in terms of their league formats, and that's fine. I'm not going to hate on it. But now we do have a backup system within the Fantrax system. And of course, bugs need to be worked out beginning of the year. There's some changes that I'm going to be advocating for in terms of this offseason, like the fact that we don't need to set our lineups on Tuesday for the entire week. Just have the backup order be determined when the player plays, just like whether you can shift them into the lineup or not. Anyway, I'm going off a tangent. How to navigate this was also something I didn't really consider, and it was who do you list first as your backups? Because I kept trying to play the game on my bench of already who on my bench still has the best matchups, and that continuously burned me throughout the entire offseason. Like I would have my first backup being like a guy who is going up against a weaker defense but isn't as good as maybe a stud I was sitting for that week who had a bad matchup. Going forward, I think if I'm going to be using this backup system, if I am sitting a stud for whatever reason, like say it's Braylon now and he's going up against Iowa, and I think he's going to have a pretty rough week, I still need to list him as my number one backup option because, again, he's a stud. He is the kind of guy that can be matchup proof, even though I am a little concerned about what's coming up in that week. Another great example, championship week. I had Trey Palmer on my bench in both of my championship matchups when he went off for 38 points, and in neither one did I have him listed as the number one option to be put in as a backup because, again, he's going up against Iowa. I think, again, I'm going to be changing my strategy moving forward. Nate, Chris, either one of you guys have comments on this? I know neither one of you really play in a ton of leagues that use the backup system, but if you did, what would be something you might consider with it, strategy-wise?
Moving my league to best ball. So I don't like the backup system at all. Like it's very well documented. I just think it's like a cheap way to get out of it. But I do think that there are issues that can present them. I think you could game the backup system is basically the bottom line.
No, again, there are ways, and that's why I say as a commissioner, you have to keep your eye on it eye out for that kind of stuff.
Like I think there are certainly ways to game it, and so if you want to be within the rules, I think that there are ways to get an advantage over your league mates.
I think so. I personally think
that's my best answer for you.
I personally think a lot of those go away if they ever move it to where the backup order gets locked the moment that a player starts playing, just like whether or not you can shift them into your starting lineup or not.
See, I agree and disagree. I just don't think there's a good solution in general with this system. I think it's best ball or nothing, but I understand why people like it. So I'm not gonna hate on it more than I have to. But I do think that there are holes in it that I don't know if they could be fixed. But my advice is if you can do it, game it, man. Like there are a lot of ways to do so, especially in the MAC contests. You can definitely take advantage of.
And I will reiterate to commissioners, if you're going to use this, you have to be on the lookout for that kind of stuff. That is your job. Nate, do you have any thoughts on this? I know, again, you
make sure it's well defined in your bylaws if you're going to police it.
I agree. Nate, again, you're a best ball guy as well, but any thoughts you might have on this?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, I'm a best ball guy. I have a 2-year-old. I don't like the idea of spending my Saturday mornings, nor do I have the time to spend my Saturday mornings trying to figure out who's in, who's out, and all that.
No, fair enough.
As far as the backup system, I haven't looked into it enough. my plan was to just kind of see how it plays out. Use this as like a dry rehearsal trial run here, year one, see what kind of bugs there are. Hopefully Fantrax will fix them, and then maybe consider it in year two. So I'll take a deeper look at it this offseason and see if any of my leagues, or if I want to play in any leagues that they implement that type of system. So don't have a ton to add on that right now.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So, Chris, we'll move on to your biggest lesson learned from CFF 2022. And you really want to talk about some of these draft strategies that involve taking players from the same team here. So what are you thinking, Mox?
So I did it a couple times, and I know it's popular, as like a lot of people do this as well. And I was doing it a moderate amount, and I've come to the conclusion that it is so low upside and negative EV that it doesn't make sense to do it moving forward.
Just to clarify, Mox, what strategy are we talking about?
Oh yeah,
here?
I should probably tell you what I think about this strategy. Taking two players at the same position on the same team to basically hedge if one guy doesn't start, or it's a confusing situation. The reason that I am skeptical this strategy works is because how much variance there is in college football, period. And that makes earlier, I'm assuming you're doing this in like the first 15 rounds if the position is that valuable, right? So you are sacrificing a high-end producer potentially to cover the same position. It's why you don't draft handcuffs to your starting running back, because it limits the upside of your overall starting lineup. And I think that there are very few situations that actually need this to, like, I just can't think of a situation where, like, moving forward, that I would actually invest in two players early. Like, there's situations that are really good, but because of how much variance there is on a year-to-year basis, we also don't know, like, we can't be that confident in that situation. And so I think a lot of picks were wasted and burnt this year on investing situations that didn't quite come to fruition, where your pick just could have been spent somewhere else and you could have had another starter in your lineup potentially. And that's, I think, especially in college fantasy, this is true. So I'm just going to move away from the strategy in its entirety, and then I'll take shots in different leagues on the other player in this situation.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a couple of instances, but first of all, I kind of agree with you. Like, the ones that come to my mind that just really didn't work out for a lot of people are the Northern Illinois running back situation. I know a lot of people were taking Whaley and Brown pretty early on there. I got, if you're watching this on YouTube, you see I have the two Alabama receivers up there, because that was kind of the first room that my mind went to in terms of like trying to draft multiple guys out of that room. Maybe not the best example because of how high Burton was going, but yeah, I pretty much agree overall with you that this isn't the way that you want to do it. Or if you're going to do this, take guys who are going like round 15, 20 plus. Don't be trying to nail down a room early on, unless, like, again, I've been on the record before, like in Dynasty, I'm a big fan of trying to lock down entire CFF rooms before. So like I have taken like Jairo Brock and Cartavius Norton this year for Iowa State. That didn't really work out for me as well, but I took like Tyler Shuck and Baron Morton. Also didn't work out really well for me. But also in another league,
that's the example that came to mind for me.
Was the Texas Tech
Baron
QBs?
Morton, Tyler Shuck, because then then Donovan Smith was involved, and it wasn't as good of an offense as we thought. Like, all of these levels of variance that are in college fantasy anyway make this extremely difficult to execute, especially when you're drafting them in high leverage situations.
Especially when you have 131 teams to pick from. Like, you don't have to go for these. You don't have to go for the situation that is so muddy. Nate, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this comes down to, what are your thoughts? What are your strategy when it comes to handcuffs? And I still have always been wanting to take like a deep dive in how relevant handcuffs are in fantasy CFF, and should you or should you not be doing it? And like I said, I'm torn on it, and a lot of and every situation is different, right? A couple that came to mind where it actually did pay off, to play devil's advocate here, obviously the Ohio State wide receiver room.
Yeah.
JSN was a total bust, but if you invested in a couple of the other ones, that paid off very well for you. Even the Michigan running back room, right? So you would have had to have, like, let's say you could have used like a 5th and a 6th round pick on Corum and Edwards. Yes, one of those is absolutely wasted, but if you could say, hey, one of these two guys is going to be a top 5 running back, you probably would do it again. But you also are left with some situations similar to the Northern Illinois running back room, where you invest in both of them and neither one of them pay up to what you were investing. So yeah, I just think every situation is different. And I'm kind of where I'm leaning right now is I'm for handcuffs if you're getting value late on both of them. And the best example I could probably give here is a couple of best balls I did. I took Chandler Morris and Max Duggan late in the drafts, talking like rounds 20 to 25. And yeah, one of those was a wasted pick, but I'm okay with wasting a 20th round pick on Chandler Morris if it means in the 23rd round I got Max Duggan.
I'll throw out Drake May and Jacoby Criswell was another one that a lot of people were. Again, I was a big Drake May fan the entire offseason, but like I understood like round 20 plus, take both of them. Why not?
I don't know if I was in any drafts where anybody even took Criswell, but yeah, I mean the value was there late on Drake May especially. But yeah, I think it would be a really good interesting debate and article to dive into some of this. Does it pay off? Does it not? But each situation is so different, and you can always drop guys to add waivers in CFF and they be fantasy relevant. So it's kind of hard to say.
Very, very true.
I wonder if I amended this idea to quarterback rooms, because I think that's where the wasted value really comes from, because you can only get one on the field at a time, right? I think Corum and Edwards is an interesting example because both could be fantasy relevant if we assume like a Hassan Hall Blake Corum split,
right?
Or like, I don't mind doing it probably at a skill position as much, depending on where you're investing and spending wide receiver 1. Like Miles Price is going round 3, and the arbitrage options were going round 17 plus for the most part. I thought that was a good way to do it if you're gonna try to hedge. But I think quarterbacks maybe is the way that I would amend this moving forward. They like, don't try to lock up a quarterback room. Pick one, especially if you're spending high draft capital, like top 15 rounds. Do round 20, whatever, because we know systems are incredibly valuable. And
I would
argue there.
I would argue that if you really just don't know that much about that quarterback room and you're looking to spend high draft capital on just one of those guys, I would just avoid it. I would just wait. Like it clearly, like to me,
get the second guy.
Get the second guy, or just don't be the guy who has to force to pay up compared to the other one. If you really think it's that much of like a 50-50 battle between them, just wait for the first guy. You can get burned by that sometimes because, again, Ontario Brown, Harrison Whaley, those guys both win the same round sometimes. And so if you're trying to get them back on the turn, then boom, they're both off the board. Well, that sucks. You missed out on it, but at least you weren't the guy that had to pay up. So
yeah, and I don't mind investing in murky situations, but there has to be value to invest in said murky situation. Like you can't be taking players probably in the top 10 rounds that are going to beat each other out for a single position battle. That's my thought.
All righty, Nate.
Sorry, I didn't spend so long on this one.
No, this one I thought was very good. Nate, not that Nate's not good. Nate has a very good one here as well. Nate, your lesson here. You said that patience is needed with freshmen, especially with dynasty and keeper CFF leagues. So
this one stinks. Sorry, I thought I was muted.
Guys that come to mind here for me, 2 wide receivers that come to my mind: Talon Cetron and Andre Green Jr. Are those the kind of guys you're talking about here, or is there somebody else you're looking at here, Nate?
No, I'm talking about the polar opposite of that, actually. So my message here is don't be like Nate. And what I do literally every season is get impatient if and this is almost specifically to running backs, but I get impatient if I do not see my freshman running backs produce in the first 4 to 5 weeks. If I don't see Judkins, or if I don't see a Jalen Ott, or if I don't see a Richard Reese, then what I end up doing is usually let them go. And if we're talking deep dynasty, that's I don't let them go. You know that you're having to wait a year on some of these guys. But if you invest in a freshman late in your redraft, or even a keeper league where you only keep, a handful of players, I always make the mistake. I did this with Breece Hall, and I always make this mistake. And what I do this year, I made the same damn mistake again. I let Damian Martinez go.
No.
I let Cartavius Norton go in a league.
No.
I let
Katron
Allen. I let Katron Allen go in a league. So yeah, that's what I do. So don't be like me. Have a little bit more patience whenever it comes to freshman running backs. And some of that's just luck, Deshaun Fenwick ended up being out, and finally, and same with Trey Lowe. So we got to see Martinez get the whole run, and it turns out, hey, he's pretty good, like the coaches talked about all offseason. So, but yeah, just sometimes you got to be a little patient with some of these guys.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I definitely, well, I don't say I didn't get burned in this league because I ended up winning it, but at the same time, like, I gave up Damian Martinez in a league because I was just like, you know what, he's been struggling to kind of break away from that backfield. I think I'm going to go ahead and trade him now and I think I got DTR out of it, which very good return, but traded away Damian Martinez, and now I'm kind of kicking myself. I'm like, dang, like, he would have been a really good running back for me for the next couple of years. But
it's tough because in CFF, like we've talked about, some of those waivers can be so good, even 5 weeks into the season, that you're like, okay, am I going to continue to sit on this guy? Like you mentioned, Andre Gray. Am I going to continue to sit on Andre Gain and Tyler Cetron or whatever? Or am I going to go pick up a guy that can actually be a really productive player for me moving forward? Like an Antoine Green at North Carolina that just shows up late. And you got to make those calls. And sometimes you get impatient and you make the wrong calls.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Again, when it comes to Dynasty, I would try to honestly trade them away before I would try to just straight up drop them. Now, again, obviously,
Sure.
time is of the essence. You have waivers and everything. You got to make decisions on who you're keeping in your lineup, who you're not. But I've gotten better return out of that, I would say. Mox, any thoughts on this?
I agree, Nate, that you should be more patient.
I told myself 2 years ago, I'm gonna be more patient. And then I told myself last year, I'm gonna be more patient. And then sure enough, here we are.
In a dynasty league, especially if you spend a draft pick on the first couple of rounds in like your what are they called? Supplemental drafts. Mm-hmm. You should at least hold on to that person at least until the end of the year. You should either be trading them or you should be holding on to them. Because like Nate said, especially deeper dynasty leagues, you're holding on to these guys for at least a year sometimes.
Yeah, I think in a deeper dynasty, the impatience would be, hey, you trade off an asset too early. Mm-hmm. And in my case, I play on my favorite setup is a hybrid dynasty, which is a keeper league where you keep 4 or 5 players at the end of the year instead of all of them. And that's where I tend to get impatient. And I'm like, okay, this guy, there's no way Damian Martinez is going to be one of my 5 keepers next year. Mm-hmm. He hasn't done crap all season. And then I
here you are. Yeah. Alrighty. Again, I think those are 3 pretty good lessons for us to learn and everything like that. And that's just us looking at it from a bird's eye view, just looking down at the sport as a whole. One last way I think is a good way to kind of look back on the season and kind of figure out where we went wrong, where we didn't, is to compare ADP to where people finished in the year. Dadgummit. All right, so first we got quarterbacks here, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see right down there below, there are 2 tables. The one on the left lists the top 12 quarterbacks in terms of their preseason ADP, and then the one on the right lists the quarterbacks who finished as the top 12 at their position. And so we're not going to run through this. I'm not going to read this table off to you guys and everything. That would be boring. Mox and Nate, we're just going to kind of pick out some of the guys here that we think either what can we kind of learn from it? What can we kind of apply going forward? And the first one I'll talk about here is the quarterback in the top 12 of ADP that clearly had the biggest drop off in terms of where they were being taken compared to where they finished on the year. And that is quarterback out of Texas, Quinn Ewers, drafted as QB 8, finished as a QB 108. Is there something to be learned here in terms of, we thought everything was coming together for Quinn Ewers here. He was looking really good, at least to start the season, but like he had the Sarkisian offense around him. He had guys to throw to, and Xavier Worthy, even Jordan Whittington, Jatavian Sanders was a good option. And he had Bijan Robinson to throw to out of the backfield. But then he really just kind of fell off as the year went along. Again, you can say he was getting banged up and everything like that. But again, out of all these quarterbacks, he definitely seemed like the one out of the top 12 with probably the most projection, maybe outside of Cameron Ward. Cameron Ward, I'd say, probably had more projection than him. But what can we learn about projecting these guys going forward? Nate, we'll go with you first.
I assume, is this ADP, not ADP, but is this production ranking on total or per game?
Total.
Okay. So with Ewers, he did miss a couple games, so part of that factors in, but by no means was he good. So, I mean, we're still looking at a guy that wasn't even a top 50 to 75 quarterback in terms of points per game. I mean, I think the big takeaway with him is it doesn't matter how good your arm is. If you are starting for the first time in a P5 program, there is some risk you are taking if you take a guy that has never started a game and you're taking him in those first 5 rounds. You could get stuck with a guy that ends up 108th in fantasy points per game. I mean, that's just some of the risk you are inheriting whenever you invest in that kind of guy. That a player like Will Rogers, who's done it for a couple of years and is in that type of system, you know that his floor just simply isn't as low as somebody like Quinn Ewers.
Yeah, I agree. Mox, what are your takeaways from Quinn Ewers being probably the worst? I would say he was the worst value in preseason CFF on the year for quarterbacks.
Yeah, and I actually drafted a lot of them. I think Nate's argument's pretty good, right? This is a guy who hadn't played football for 2 years. He sat at Ohio State last year, and he declared early from Texas. Maybe a year and a half is more accurate. But he hadn't played football in a long time. It's an adjustment, like it just is. We saw him come out fire, and he certainly took a step back when I think defenses were able to key in on some of his errors. I do think he was injured, for what it's worth.
True.
I think there was an injury affecting him that was a bigger deal than maybe people thought with his hand or his thumb, but he still wasn't good. And I will not take the same leap of faith I did last time. Probably, like, there's a lot of risk involved. The upside was really high.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, the upside was obviously high, but I didn't think that I didn't think it'd go this bad. But I didn't weight the risk enough. Like, the upside was quarterback. Well, the upside pro was probably never quarterback 1. It was probably like quarterback 5. So I was like drafting him as quarterback 8 with a substantial amount of risk.
But to be fair, though, you're also looking at it like, again, Mox, I know you played in a lot of C2C leagues. I'm not going to blame you for drafting him highly in those leagues because, again, like, regardless,
I'm talking about like all my best balls. I drafted him 4th and 5th round.
Okay,
I was way ahead of consensus on him.
Gotcha. Okay. Another guy. Go ahead, Nate.
I was just going to say, maybe the lesson here is that, one, he's not in a true like air raid system. He provides zero rushing upside. And if we look at the top 12 as far as like after the season, the rankings, every single one of them are either dual threats, or they're Austin Reed, who's going to throw the ball 60 times a game, or they're Michael Penix, who's going to throw the ball 60 times a game. That's where, if you're drafting one of those two, you should know that your floor could actually be pretty low.
Yeah, you know what, Nate? I think that sums it up perfectly. Another guy I want to throw out here. Before the season, Austin Reed, again, that kind of came late. Western Kentucky makes sense why he was a value right there at the end and everything. Technically a steal according to my table here. Michael Penix, Kalen LeBoard system. We knew that could work out. Riley Leonard quarterback out of Duke. Where the hell did this come from? Again, we knew there was some dual threat ability there, but he finishes as QB9 on the year on nobody's radar pretty much to start the season. What do you guys think? Mox, we'll go with you first here. What do you think about Riley Leonard? And do we think this is something that we can project moving forward into next year? I know Chris K has already talked about how he's thought about top quarterbacks for next year, and he didn't have Riley Leonard come off of his tongue immediately as a top CFF quarterback for next year. Do we think this continues moving forward, or do we think this is his ceiling and he can only go down from here?
He finished quarterback 9. I don't know if he's going to finish top 12 quarterback next year, and I'm not sure he will ever again. But a lot of that is like luck based. Like, Duke played some really funky games this year, especially against like Miami, where like short fields, and he just really funky season for them. As long as Kevin Johns is the offensive coordinator there, though, I am in on this Duke offense, at least for the quarterback perspective. He was the offensive coordinator at Memphis for the last handful of years when their offense was like producing at a pretty high rate. He was that offensive coordinator at Texas Tech before that. So this is a guy who's has experience producing pretty high quality offenses. So I like Riley Leonard. I don't know that I'm going to draft him as a top 12 quarterback, but I will certainly be drafting him probably as a top 24 quarterback.
Yeah. Nate, what are your thoughts on Riley Leonard?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. He's just a better quarterback than what I had thought of him as prior to this season, and I think that offensive coordinator, like Mox has mentioned, I think he did a fantastic job there. Could have easily been the guy we listed on our biggest surprises.
Oh yeah,
is that Duke offense? So. Yeah, I mean, I think people are going to be more willing to invest in Duke, obviously, after how things went this year. So it's all going to come down to value. But I'm more intrigued by that system and Riley Leonard now than I was a couple of months ago. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
8-4 Duke.
8-4 Duke. Dude, Mike Elko, coach of the year, right there.
So good.
Certainly in contention.
Before we move on from quarterbacks here, I'll ask each of you both just point out one player on this table here that you just want to give a 30-second talk about, like why you think that their season was so important, whether it's somebody who disappointed or somebody who outperformed expectations here. I can give you a second unless Nate, you got one?
I got one. I'll give Mox a chance here. This isn't going to come as a surprise to anybody. This is my one chance to beat on the Virginia system again. I
knew as soon as I said this, I'm like, Nate's going to go after Armstrong.
If you invested in Brennan Armstrong, you did not listen to a word that myself or Jared too. What we were saying in this offseason, it is a bad offensive system. They ruined DJU. They've ruined Brennan Armstrong. Whoever they get out of the transfer portal, do not invest in them at quarterback next year because they're going to ruin him too. Okay, so just don't do it. That's the thing that stands out to me.
I'm just waiting on the receivers to enter the portal along with Armstrong. Mox, one guy real quick that you want to highlight here from this table.
Mine would have been Armstrong too. Just horrible evaluation of the system. But Cameron Ward, my two most drafted quarterbacks in CFF and CFF best balls, clean ears, Cameron Ward.
Ooh.
Don't assume that problems that were problems at the FCS level, like deep ball accuracy, will suddenly be fixed when you move up to the Power 5 level. That was quite the oversight on my part. He was a terrible deep ball passer at Incarnate Word and continued to be so at Washington State. So again, make sure that you are properly evaluating risk based on where you draft these players and in accordance with their upside.
But man, he looks cool throwing it with all those different arm angles, doesn't he?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, he definitely does. Definitely does.
I'll just say I'll say my quick shout out to Bo Nix, QB1 on the season. Absolutely incredible resurgence for him. Good luck to him wherever he goes next. Again, we're not going to go through the whole table. If you want to see the table, go watch the YouTube product. It's been up here pretty much the entire time we've been talking quarterbacks. But now we're going to go on to running backs here. Kind of a very similar thing. One thing I wanted to point out, we talked about handcuffing earlier. And man, Rasheen Ali there, obviously out beginning of the season, doesn't come back until like the 12th game, basically, for Marsh. I think 11th game, actually. But his replacement in Kalen LeBourne, right there, RB11. So we got that one right. Outside of that, probably the two biggest misses are Travion Henderson, Lou Nichols, and Tavion Thomas. Pretty much all right there, very similar to one another. What do you guys think about those three in terms of how far we kind of missed on them? Is there anything that we can take away from that, or do you think it was a little bit of rotten luck for the industry?
Injuries played a huge part in pretty much all of those outcomes, except Thomas, who was inexplicably benched halfway through the year. But I was riding the Tavion Thomas as a bus train anyway, mostly because he just outperformed his touchdown expectation by 10 touchdowns last year. I don't think there was a path where he could live up, but it wasn't because I thought that he was going to get in the doghouse for 3 games. That it was just weird. A lot of this felt weird more than anything. We didn't know Rasheen Ali was going to sit out. That came out a week or two before the season. We did know that it was going to be Kalen LeBourne. It ended up being so. But I mean, I didn't. Lou Nichols also injured. I feel like we just had a lot of bad luck. To be totally honest,
Lou Nichols, I think we kind of underestimated the impact that a new offensive coordinator would have there at Central Michigan. We knew,
and they lost 2 offensive linemen. Yeah,
and we knew coming in that offensive coordinator at the stop he had previously been at did not have a workhorse running back, and we all kind of assumed oh, but it's Lou Nichols. Of course they're going to hand him the rock 30 times a game still. Well, they went and found themselves some other running backs on that roster that they felt comfortable handing the ball off to, and really we never really saw Nichols have that true workhorse running back ability that he had the previous year. Nate, what are your thoughts on those three guys, Henderson, Nichols, and Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, I think all three of them are unique in a sense. I didn't invest in Henderson or Nichols at all. Thomas, I did a little bit. Like I said, his is a lot of off the field issues, so it's kind of unique. Lou Nichols just wasn't very good, and he was a little banged up. He just wasn't good. Henderson was banged up, but I mean, I think we learned a valuable lesson with Ohio State as a whole this year, and that, man, if you invest in them, you are also taking a risk that they just are so far ahead of their competition in the regular season that you could just have guys just sitting out randomly throughout the season. So it's become a little bit of a risky play to invest in Ohio State as a whole. I know a lot of people are going to look to take him early in drafts next year, and I'm going to be kind of concerned by it. They're so deep at every position that they can just sit guys and not worry about it and still smash Indiana by 45 points.
Yeah, and definitely something to consider for Marvin Harrison Jr. next year, because he's probably going to be the wide receiver one off of most people's boards.
Sure,
I would say. Moving over to the other side of the board here, again, we were talking about some guys who did finish top 12 this year, how they compare to the preseason. We talked about already. Kalen LeBourne, he comes in for Rasheen Ali, picks up right where he left off. Quinshon Judkins, we already talked about him earlier. There's a trio of guys here that were being taken really late in drafts, anywhere from pretty much right next to each other, running back 69, 70, and 72 here. That would be Xavier Valade, Carson Steele, and Israel Abanikanda. What do we learn about those three guys? Is there a theme among those guys that we clearly they were on our radar already for the most part, but for some reason we felt like there was reason to hold off on them until late. Izzy, of course, again, that one got saved by the fact that Rodney Hammond went down early because he looked like he was going to be the running back one for Pittsburgh, and then Izzy took over from there. But Carson Steele and Valade, in hindsight, it feels like we should have been on these guys a little bit more. Nate, what do you think about those three guys?
Three good examples of trust the system. And when it comes to running backs, volume is what's key. And we knew with the coaching change with Frank Cignetti coming over to Pittsburgh that he loved to feed one running back a lot of carries, like he did at his previous time at Pittsburgh, as well as his time at Boston College. Same thing with Carson Steele. Ball State was going to feed him. We knew that. Xavier Valade, Arizona State loves to run the heck out of the football. And so, yeah, just trust that the volume will be there. Valladay is not somebody I invested in, and I wish I would have now. So
Yeah, I traded for him in quite a few leagues. Mox, what do you think about these three guys?
Maybe Carson Steele was obvious in hindsight. Like,
yeah,
John Paddock is clearly not the quarterback that you want running this offense. So him seeing a substantially larger workload as a second-year player too, like we probably should have known that. Elevating Daniel Ngata over Xavier Valladay, which I did personally.
I did too. It was bad.
Clearly a mistake. And then Izzy, I think you're right. He got it would have been a bigger split with Hammond if Hammond had been healthy. For the most part. But honestly, I didn't feel like running back was a position that totally missed real bad this year.
No, we did very well for the most part.
Pretty good compared to most other positions.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a great segue to go ahead and get us into the wide receivers, because this is where things got a little ugly for us in terms of it. Injury, I think, played a huge part for wide receivers this year. Jackson Smith and Jigba, Miles Price on and off the field, Cedric Tillman out for a good chunk of the year, and those are kind of the main ones right there. Injury, a big part for those guys. But then we also had some straight up misses, I would say. And one I would say I'm happy that I didn't invest in was Kayshon Boutte, but I would be lying if I didn't say that I had all the Miles Price in the world. And so two guys right there that I think straight up missed. So let's talk about them first, because we can't really super blame injury for Miles Price or Kayshon Boutte. Mox, what did we learn from those guys in terms of how to better evaluate them moving forward? Better evaluating the wide receiver position moving forward.
When a guy has a mysterious ankle injury, doesn't talk to his coach, hates his coach, should downgrade him a little bit further than we did. I remember we were on our wide receiver show, and then we did one with John Lobb, maybe the same day actually, and we were talking about it, and I was like, I moved Boutte outside my top 30. I was like, this is that was something I got right of just reading what's happening in front of me, being like, okay, this dude has issues. And a lot of that I think is off the field and potentially injury, but we don't know what the injury was. Jermaine Burton stinks. I'm not even sure he's good at football. I'm gonna be honest with you.
Imagine how low he would have been if he didn't actually have a decent second half of the season, or at least decent last 4 weeks of the season.
Oh, right? I know.
This dude's a really good athlete who I don't think could play football. Freakish. He only has I don't remember what he did last 3 games, so he may have surpassed this. But prior to week 10 of this year, he had one 100-yard game in his entire career as a wide receiver. So this is not a player who we probably should have been as high on. It made sense giving the Jamison Williams corollary, but it was kind of obvious Saban didn't like his wide receivers. And he made a point of that too. He said it a bunch of times, and maybe we just weren't willing to listen there. But Miles Price, though, I don't know what the heck happened there. Even when he was on the field, he wasn't being featured.
Nate, you have any insight on Miles Price that you kind of figured out?
Combination of things. He was dinged up early in the season, so he missed a little bit of time, and that's a program that had a lot of changes happening at quarterback, and I think that offense was humming probably at their highest point whenever Baron Morton was in there, and the slot position was being used quite a bit at that time between Price and Xavier White, and I think that Xavier White proved that he was good enough to be on the field and get some of those targets while Price was down, and it just never allowed Price to really take off as the target hog that we thought maybe he would be at the beginning of the year. But I think it's safe to say also he's probably not as good as what we had hoped and what that staff had kind of built him up as in the fall camps.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Going over to the wide receivers in terms of the guys who did do well this season and who outperformed expectations greatly. Charlie Jones, we were all kicking ourselves pretty much the first 2 weeks of we should have picked up on the fact that he and Aiden O'Connell were childhood friends. That was available information. That probably would have been a good indicator that he probably was the guy. There was hype around him going into the season. That one should have been on our radars a little bit more. Jalen Hyatt, I'm not going to kill us too much for that one because, again, Cedric Tillman was all of our guys. He gets hurt. Jalen Hyatt steps right in. It's the same thing as Rasheen Ali and Kalen LeBourne. What are you going to do when one guy's not playing and then somebody else steps up? The one that I am still trying to wrap my head around is Keelan Stokes at Tulsa. Had a really, really rough year in 2021. I know a lot of people were drafting him really high that year, disappointed overall, and then now he comes back with a vengeance. He was drafted as a wide receiver 117 and finishes as a wide receiver 8. Nate, what do you think about Keelan Stokes, and what do you think we missed there?
I think it's kind of similar to Izzy Abanikanda in that we were maybe just a year too early, but the talent is there, and it's a decent system. And they found themselves trailing a lot of games this year, and their defense wasn't quite as good, so they had to change the game script a little bit. But I mean, obviously impressive performance with him kind of being that productive through 2 quarterbacks throughout the season, as they dealt with some injuries at the quarterback position late in the season. So yeah, I mean, that came out of nowhere, and he was crazy impressive this year.
Mox, what are your thoughts on Mr. Stokes?
Yeah, like Nate said, we're a little early on him, but we probably should have kept a little bit of the faith. He was hurt like all of last year, pretty much. It wasn't one injury; it was another. I don't remember what his first injury was, but I remember like maybe he tore his quad at some point. It was something like it was a lower leg injury with like a legitimate muscle tear, and so he just like couldn't stay healthy last season. And even when he was playing, he's banged up. We probably should not have faded him as hard as we did, especially because we knew the offense was going to be like extremely pass heavy. And we knew what Philip Montgomery was about. And we know what Brinsanity is.
Yep.
So that was probably just an oversight. Because I don't even think I ranked him either. Like I don't know if either y'all two did, but I don't remember ranking him. And if I did, it was incredibly low.
I would say mine was not high with Stokes. If I had to go back and look. Before we move on from wide receivers here, Nate, pick one guy out of the table that you want to highlight that we haven't talked about yet. Forgot to do this with running backs, so sorry, running back fans.
Yeah, no, that's all good. Let's take a look at here. Let's talk about Xavier Worthy for a second. This guy was terrible this year. He was terrible, and I get it that he had a quarterback that had difficulties being able to hit him downfield. But this is without Isaiah Nayor, right? This is without somebody stealing targets for him. He got targets, but my God, he was unable to do anything with them. Maybe that was a product of the quarterback play. That dude drops a lot of balls. He gives up on a lot of deep balls. Rumors are now that he is not going to transfer to USC, like a lot of people thought, that Texas has reeled him back in. I don't think that's good. I think he's somebody that could probably use
a change of scenery,
change of scenery and that type of thing. But man, he was surprisingly bad this year.
Maybe not too much of a hot take, I guess, given what we know now and everything. But I wouldn't have been surprised had Isaiah Nayor stayed healthy, that Nayor probably outproduces Worthy this year.
That's possible. Yeah, that's very possible. I'm curious to see how well he plays next year. He is a deep ball, go get it down the sidelines type of player. And so far Quinn Ewers has not shown the ability to maximize that type of talent. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out next year.
Yeah. I'll tell you what I'm doing next year. I'm probably going to be picking up Nayor in later in drafts if he comes back for another year. So, Mox, what's one guy you want to highlight here before we move on from wide receivers?
I'm going to give you a 2-for-1 special, and that is the Ohio State wide receivers. We were right to draft 2 in the top 10.
Yeah.
We just had JSN get injured, and I think that is a vibe moving forward. I think that you can legitimately make the argument that every single year you should be drafting Ohio State wide receiver from the top 10. Marvin Harrison, wide receiver 5. Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver 7. Like that's just something I'll tuck away. And if one of the second guy next year, who it's going to be Egbuka or Harrison. I mean, they're both going to be wide receiver ones, but whoever goes second is the person that I'm going to be drafting probably. Like
I imagine it'll probably be Big Buka.
Yeah, the upside showed there. I think Buka could outproduce him too, just based on the role he has. I think Harrison is a little bit more difficult to replicate, but still both are going to be wide receiver ones. So just something that I'm going to be doing. I will draft both as top 10 guys probably next year. So we did this year. No reason to change it.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Buka definitely got buoyed a little bit by a really strong start to the season. Like, he had 3 top 12 performances in the first half, and then his best performance was wide receiver 28 in the final week of the season. So he faded a little bit down the stretch. But even still, like, I fully expect him to be awesome next year as well. But also, like Nate said, again, Ohio State a little bit worrying now that we see how willing they are to just sit players for a long period of time, because they know that their actual goals for the season are down the line. We're not going to talk tight ends here tonight because, again, we're going long already, and we are pretty much right at the end of our show. So really appreciate all of you guys tuning in here. Again, I know Chris is sad over there. I can see him. He's sad we don't get to talk about tight ends.
I wasn't going to say anything, but now that you brought it up, it's tight end erasure.
So tight end erasure. We'll have plenty of time in the offseason to discuss all the tight ends, including Mr. Morlock, Chris's new favorite tight end out there. Nate, really appreciate you coming on. Chris, you've been awesome. You guys have been awesome co-hosts throughout the entire season. I really cannot appreciate you guys enough. All of you listening out there, we're going to keep it going here. At least for the next probably 2 weeks, we'll continue discussing coaching changes. Transfer portal stuff's definitely about to heat up here. But then I am going out of the country for a couple of weeks, so won't be producing CTN during that time, as much as I would love to just pick up my computer and desk and bring everything with me, but I got a vacation to have. So again, you guys have been awesome. Nate, Chris, you guys got anything you guys are working on before we get out of here that you want to promote?
I do not. I'm taking a break from things for a little bit here. Just
yes, sir.
Recharge the batteries.
I get it, man. I get it. Mox?
Yeah, I've already been dropping some bowl lines that I like in our C2C Discord. If you're an NAL member, these have already moved. San Diego State, Clemson, Tulane. A lot of value at the open bowl season. I'll just be doing bowl content, betting content for the rest of the year. So hit me up if you want to get the odds.
Hit him up if you want to win money. Again, you guys have been awesome, and really can't wait to have you guys back on the show, and let's get it started in the off season. So really appreciate all of you guys listening, and let's get ready for 2023. We hit the ground running. There is no off season in college football. There's always news to be had. So appreciate all of y'all, and y'all have a wonderful and blessed day. See y'all.